So hearings continue in the COVID inquiry with former Health Secretary Sajid Javid and former Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab today.
Yesterday we had Michael Gove, who was Cabinet Office Minister at the time, who gave this apology.
I want to take this opportunity, if I may, my lady, to apologise to the victims who endured so much pain, the families who endured so much loss as a result of the mistakes that were made by government in response to the pandemic. And as a minister responsible for the Cabinet Office and who was also close to many of the decisions that were made, I must take my share of responsibility for that. Politicians are human beings, we're fallible, we make mistakes and we make errors.
Honestly, it makes me despair. Well, author and co-founder of the children's campaign group UsforThem, Molly Kingsley, is in the studio with us now. I'm so glad you're here, Molly. You've watched this inquiry in such granular detail, haven't you?
You can bet.
Oh, I'm losing it.
What is it like for you? Because I know what it's like for me. Let's just share for a moment how frustrating it is to watch it.
I have to say, I feel slightly on the brink. It is really frustrating, and for a number of reasons. You know, first of all, because you have ministers yesterday like Gove, who was obviously so well prepared, I suspect briefed very carefully by lawyers. You know, he knew exactly what he was saying. I suspect he had an idea what he was going to be asked, and that really came across. And against that, you have this very one-sided, almost myopic view from the inquiry and the inquiry KC. So, you know, again, yesterday, we were told by the inquiry KC that, of course, you know, all public health advice pointed in one direction, the need for faster and sooner restrictions. And, you know, that is the very matter which many of us think the inquiry is there to determine.
What did you make of it when Hugo Keith pushed back when Michael said about the fact that, you know, there is a growing body of... He didn't use the word evidence, I would, but he used the word judgment, that this is a man-made virus from the lab in Wuhan, and he was quickly told this is not within the terms of reference of this inquiry. Why, Molly?
I mean, it's incredible, isn't it? So the reason they gave was because this came out after the terms of reference were set. Well, change the terms of
they should have been. Why weren't they in the terms of reference to start with?
Why weren't they in terms of reference? Yeah, I mean, the reason, again, they've given is because this is a UK inquiry. It's looking at UK matters of pandemic preparedness. But, of course, you can't look at it in isolation. And, in fact, you know, our leaders are asking that we join an international alliance via the WHO. So how can we consider this at a national level?
And if Gove's right that there is this view that it was started in a lab when research is being done on other viruses, we have to know about that, because if that sort of research is being done in labs here, it could be triggered here, and we might want to restrict that sort of research or regulate it better.
Absolutely, Andrew. And, you know, of course we have to know about it, because also it is likely, if it was the case, that it tempered the entire pandemic response. You know, we need to understand what was known. Was that responsible for some of this very exaggerated messaging we saw at the beginning? Who knows? And, you know, at least these are valid questions to be considered, and for the inquiry to say, no, sorry, you know, out of our terms of reference is surprising.
But there's nothing in there about motive, Molly. And how do you include that in the terms of reference, I suppose, is the point. Because if this is a man-made virus in a lab, and even the FBI in America have now pretty much said that the weight of evidence is there, then who had a vested interest in finding a pandemic to get us out of this? Who had a vested interest in saying the nation, the world, has to stay locked up until we can get that very profitable drug out? It all has to start with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think as soon as you begin looking for motive, you are on difficult ground, legally and for this inquiry. I don't see this inquiry.
Will anybody?
This would not be the forum for that. I mean, potentially, if there were ever later down the line criminal proceedings, that would be the right legal forum. I very much doubt that's going to happen here, at least not for the lab leak. There may be other elements in time. But you can at least look to dive into the evidence that exists, much of which is in the public domain. So the COVID Consensus, a book by Toby Green, has chapters on the lab leak theory. They are backed up by evidence. Why isn't this
Matt Ridley as well?
Matt Ridley,
And Michael Gove could have pushed back against a lawyer and carried on pushing back. I mean, what's he going to do? Be thrown out? It's not a courtroom. It's not. What's he going to do? Dump the contempt of court?
Yeah,
he could have kept pushing back. He's one of the most articulate advocates in the cabinet.
He could have done, and we saw that yesterday actually throughout. I mean, he really did play it very well.
He really took on the lawyer for the Scottish government, didn't he? He really took her on, big time.
And actually the lawyer, in some ways, I thought the most interesting bit of yesterday was the bit that wasn't reported in the press because it came at the very end, which was the KC for the children's organisations, who really was, he was great actually, very adversarial, said, who was considering kids? Kids weren't being considered, were they? Was Williamson involved in these momentous decision to close schools? And actually Gove, he fought back, but it was a very interesting part of the inquiry that deserved more
we've
coverage.
said it before and we'll say it again, there were no children in the frames of references if it wasn't for you and your organisation who've done some phenomenal lobbying and amazing good work in this area. What have you recently uncovered about the Ethics Committee? This is interesting.
Yeah, so this is an incredible story, I think. It's in a new book that we've just written. It's called The Accountability Deficit. And for the course of that book, so myself and one of my co-authors are both lawyers by background, and we had a long summer of researching, going through all the minutes of various of these committees, and we stumbled across a committee that had existed for much of the pandemic called the Moral and Ethical Advisory Group. This is all in the public domain. The minutes are there. If you look at the minute, it's a chapter in the book. You look at the minutes and it's a chapter in the book too. What you see is this committee existed and was meant to advise on ethical issues. At the beginning of the pandemic, it started advising on, ethical issues relating to lockdown, relating to care homes, relating to the rollout of the vaccine. Documented in the minutes is the fact that the committee started giving, let's just say, inconvenient advice about the ethics of many of these measures. In particular, they raised serious concerns in writing about the ethics of COVID passes and the rollout of the vaccine to children, at which point the committee were gradually sidelined. They were then given a complete 3-month sabbatical over the critical moment of the rollout of the kids' jabs. Then they were effectively grounded completely a year before the term.
And by who, Molly? By who?
We don't know. So the paper trail documents, and I really would recommend the book. It's a very big unreported story. There's a whole different issue in that, so you effectively have the exclusive on this.
Yeah.
But it is all there in black and white in the minutes. Also, actually, in black and white is a very interesting disclosure that Chris Whitty is recorded as having counselled.
He's the Chief Medical Officer.
Chris Whitty, Chief Medical Officer, at one point after the committee had been giving these quite awkward recommendations about, in this case, COVID passes. Chris Whitty is recorded as having counselled the committee to stop putting recommendations in writing.
What?
Yeah. Which is, I'm very glad that is your reaction. That was my reaction when I came across this. It is in black and white. There are footnoted minutes. This was, I had a cup of tea at the time and I spat it out when I saw
I'm not even remotely surprised.
And you think, how is the COVID inquiry not picking up on this? So yesterday, there was a very big discussion about organisational structures. Michael Gove, as Cabinet Office Minister, would have been instrumental in those structures. Why was this not raised? Why wasn't it raised to Whitty? Will it be raised tomorrow to Hancock? I very much doubt it.
And do we know the membership of that committee?
We do. It was public membership, and for the purposes of the chapter in the book we wrote, we spoke to 2 former members to confirm key aspects, and they were confirmed off record, and I can't reveal who those are.
No, of course.
That is documented in the book, and it needs to be covered. This is clearly a public interest.
Remind us the name of your book, Molly. What's the book called?
Yeah, it's called The Accountability Deficit, and it was just out last week, and it's available on Amazon.
Brilliant.
Fascinating.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you.